Great, so welcome everyone to a presentation on lessons learned from community-based natural infrastructure projects. My name is Brianna McLeod and I will be moderating this webinar. I'm in my last year at Mount Allison University and have worked for EOS this past year primarily on our food forest project, of which you will learn more about soon. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that our work at EOS Eco-Energy is done on the traditional unceded lands and waters of the Mi'kmaq people. Today's webinar is part of Tantramar Climate Change Week. I will place the link to the event series in the chat box just so you can check it out and see some of the other webinars that we still have going on this week. There it is. Climate Change Week started in winter 2013 and is an opportunity to celebrate solutions that exist and to remind ourselves to take action and adapt to the changes we are already experiencing. It's a time to learn more about climate change issues and how we can take personal measures at home, work, and in our communities, of which will be the subject of this presentation today. So today's speaker is Amanda Marlin. Amanda Marlin has a master's in environmental studies from Dalhousie University and an undergrad degree from Mount Allison. She has been the executive director of EOS Eco-Energy for over 8 years. Under her direction, EOS has won numerous awards and recently become a charitable organization. Amanda and her team at EOS have coordinated various projects across the Tantramar-Munro-Cook region to reduce emissions and help municipalities and citizens adapt to climate impacts. She planted some of the very first rain gardens in New Brunswick more than 8 years ago, and most recently she coordinated the installation of the green roof on the Sackville Town Hall and worked with EOS staff and partners to build food forests at local schools. She and her husband and children live on a hobby farm in Sackville where they enjoy the benefits of solar power, gardens, fruit trees, and their very adorable flock of chickens. Before I turn things over to her, I would just like to remind everyone to please stay muted throughout the webinar. We will keep questions to the end in order to stay on schedule. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them in the chat box at any time, and then I will ask the questions to Amanda at the end. If you're joining in on the phone, we will also give you a chance to ask your questions. Thank you very much, Amanda, and I will turn things over to you now.
Great, well, thank you so much, Bree. All right, so as Bree said, we're going to dive into some lessons learned from our projects on rain gardens, green roofs, and food forests. All right, can everybody hear me and see this okay? Yes, perfect. All right. What we're going to talk about over the next hour is a little bit about EOS for those of you who aren't familiar with us, and then go into a bit about what natural infrastructure is, go over the benefits, and then we'll dive into our projects, so our rain gardens, our food forests, our green roofs, and go over the lessons we learned, and then also wrap up with an opportunity for people to get involved. So EOS is really focused on the Munro-Cook-Tantramar region, but lately we've also been doing some work beyond our borders too. We mostly focus on conducting research on community planning, education and outreach, and action projects on the ground, which is the focus of today's talk. Our projects are really about sustainability, about energy efficiency and renewable energy, waste reduction, climate change adaptation, and most recently, we've also begun watershed monitoring. We collaborate with businesses, individuals, and different groups in all levels of government to get this work done. So what is natural infrastructure? It uses ecological processes and natural landscapes for infrastructure outcomes. It uses nature to solve challenges like stormwater runoff, erosion, and flooding. But it also has to be active. It has to be created by humans and for a particular purpose. So these rain gardens, green roofs, food forests are just some examples. There are certainly many others like bioswales and naturalized stormwater ponds, but we'll focus on the ones that EOS has done recently. So there's lots and lots of benefits from natural infrastructure projects. To name some of them, they can be less costly than traditional or gray infrastructure, and their value increases over time. So unlike culverts and bridges, which have a lifespan, the value of planting things increases over time because the trees and plants grow larger, fill in, that value increases. Natural infrastructure also reduces flood risk and can reduce urban heat island effects too, and lots of other co-benefits. So we increase biodiversity, we're improving and providing habitat because we're planting trees and things. That there's also the sequestration of carbon. We're able to save energy at times and filter pollutants too. And then there's also benefits from doing these things in a community-based way. So we're able to create community spaces together where we can grow food, where we can connect to nature, and where there can also be lots of mental health benefits too. It's about community members working together, coming together, building skills at the same time, and really empowering the community. And then all of this really works together to enhance our resilience to climate impacts as a community. So when we talk about action for climate change, it's about mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is reducing emissions, kind of getting at things at the source, but then because impacts are happening already and will continue for a long time, we also need to look at adapting to those impacts. And so natural infrastructure projects are really special because they help do both. They help us to reduce emissions and they help us adapt to those impacts. So EOS really likes community-based natural infrastructure projects for a number of reasons. We know that climate change, stormy weather, flooding has impacted our region for some time. We also know there's growing interest and concern around food insecurity issues in our region. Supply chain worries, were around even before the pandemic, and that of course has compounded everything too over the last couple of years. So at EOS, we always wonder, what can we do at the community level? How can individual homeowners adapt? How can we help our schools, our organizations, our municipalities? Really, it's about how we can come together to improve our communities at the local level. So let's tour our projects to find out more. So we'll start off with our rain gardens. So what is a rain garden? Well, it's a shallow depression. Really, we dig down a bit and we create an area that can collect rainwater, about 6 to 8 inches deep or so. So we create this space where rainwater can be absorbed naturally into the ground. And we choose deep-rooted native plants and grasses so that they are well suited to our climate. They're water-loving, so they'll help soak up that rainwater, but they also have deep roots so that they can find water when it's not raining, because certainly our precipitation patterns are changing where we see a lot of rain at once and then longer drought periods. But those deep roots also help to break up the soil and make it more permeable. So this is how a rain garden works. If you were to go in and cut one of ours in half, you see that there's a source for rainwater. So in this case, it's the house from the downspouts and the gutters flowing into the rain garden. You can see those deep roots that are helping to break up the soil, all the lovely native plants, and I'll go over some of the ones that we plant in particular. And then there can be a berm at the lower end as well, because it's about keeping the rainwater in the ground and letting it get absorbed. So really in a nutshell, I mean, there are lots more details, but in terms of the time we have today, I'll just say briefly a few things about planting a rain garden. You need to start off by choosing a safe location. So that means a spot that isn't too close to a foundation. They recommend, I think, about 10 feet away, so that when you're absorbing that water into the ground, it's not going to find its way into your house or into the basement. It can't be over a septic tank or a septic field, and it can't be on too much of a slope either. You may want to measure the drainage area. So if you're wanting to capture rain coming off of a roof, then it's ideal to measure that roof space. And then you can also multiply it by a particular factor associated with the kind of soil you have. So if it's very sandy or if it's very clay-like, there's different numbers. But really, at the very least, any size rain garden is better than nothing and will help in your area. So then you'll want to select and order native plants and dig the garden. And of course, when you're going to dig anywhere, you want to make sure that you're checking to make sure there's no gas lines or utility lines. These gardens aren't very deep, so hopefully you're avoiding most of those, but you never know what you're going to find, because we also once found an illegal cable, like TV cable running from one house to another that wasn't very deep. So you never know. So you want to be as safe as possible. And then you want to improve the soil and add in compost and that sort of thing. We have dug all of our gardens by hand and moved all that soil by hand. Lots of volunteers, even kids involved, as you can see in the pictures here, and kids involved in planting as well. And then it's about maintenance. And in the first year, of course, you want to water things until they get going on their own, but long-term maintenance is very little, because really we're creating natural spaces, something that you might find like at the edge of a meadow or that sort of thing. So if you're up for a wild look, then it's just going to do its thing and perform really well for a really long time. But you can find a lot more details in our how-to guide on the EOS website, and there are others online as well. Shediac Bay Watershed Association has a really excellent detailed guide too. So here's what our rain gardens tend to look like. We plant lots of beautiful things. There's lots of color in the rain gardens. So things like Joe Pyeweed and sedges, sweetgrass, which is really special, bee balm. The little white flowers are bloodroot, of course, black-eyed Susans, butterfly weed and irises, milkweed, blue vervain is the sort of blue, purpley spiky one. Also fiddleheads and reeds and things like that. So sometimes we joke a little bit and say a lot of these things are things you'd find in the ditches along the sides of the roads, but in those locations where they can be dry or they can be inundated, those are really good plants. So now I'm going to take you on a little time lapse of us planting one of the rain gardens we did in Sackville. It's one of our residential gardens behind a house downtown, and we actually planted it in a spot that used to be a parking area, so it was very compacted, full of gravel, quite hard to dig actually. But there we are with our staff, our volunteers, the homeowners, and in an afternoon we were able to dig it and plant it. So it really is an easy option for a lot of homeowners. There we go with our native plants. This was in an area where there would be rainwater running off higher up across the backyard, down their driveway. It would erode some of their driveway, wash out, and then end up down on the street and into the storm drains as well. So this rain garden, it will continue to grow and spread out and stuff. And definitely, from the first day, it helps to reduce and catch that rainwater. All right, so lots of rain gardens. Interesting to know that when percent of the ground is covered hard surfaces, that it can affect the flow of water. So you might think, we're not in downtown Toronto or Montreal, but even when just 10% of the ground is covered, it's affecting how rain is flowing over our land. So in our small towns and communities, it's very helpful too. So the main benefit of rain gardens is to reduce flooding, runoff, and erosion, as I've said, and they really are an easy and cost-effective way to reduce your stormwater runoff, in your own backyard, or certainly as a community project too. They help to recharge groundwater, instead of having it overflow and go down into the storm drains, and then in Sackville, it's out into the bay, and we kind of lose it. So really great at recharging the groundwater. They also absorb 30 to 40% more rain than your lawn, which is a really fun fact. And we've seen this in action too, where the rain is flowing just, over the grass and then into the garden and gets absorbed there. So you may think, it's not like you paved your whole property, but they really are even more helpful than grass. They improve biodiversity, they support pollinators. They really are considered pollinator gardens too. And as soon as we plant things, the butterflies and bees and stuff seem to find us right away. I usually get questions about mosquitoes, but because it's a rain garden and if it's designed properly, it shouldn't be holding water for more than a day before it's absorbed into the ground. So, the water's not there long enough for mosquitoes to breed. And it's important to remember that these aren't ponds, these aren't wetlands, these are rain gardens. So just to go over a few more details about the gardens we've planted in our region, I think at this point we're around 30 total over the last almost a decade now. And they've ranged in size from about 100 square feet in people's front yards and backyards to 350 square feet in municipal parks. But most have been in residential areas. We've also done some at schools. And we've been really thankful to get funding from EcoAction, that's the federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the Environmental Trust Fund, which is from the province of New Brunswick. So a few tips for success if you're interested in planting a rain garden at your own home or as a community project in your town. First off, you really don't have to be an expert. I certainly was not an expert when I started out, but it's about doing research and asking lots of good questions and finding good partnerships. So finding people that want to do this with you, whether it's community groups or schools or municipalities. But I say good partnerships because we've also had times when we've had our rain gardens mowed over, and not intentionally and not planned to be that way, but where staff have changed at different organizations, people have forgotten about them, or the sign got stolen, people didn't know, and because it's native plants and looks like weeds, sometimes, you know, happens where it gets mowed over. Can grow back, but if it gets mowed a lot, that's become a problem. So just make sure that you really have partners who are around for the long term, who can, you know, maintain things and at least not mow them over. Also really good to choose visible locations if you're doing a community project. So you want to choose spots where, you know, it'll help educate others and help spread that word. But residential locations have worked really well too. And we've, you know, partnered with residents and homeowners who are gardeners themselves, who really care about environmental issues, want to make a difference, and are very happy to host a rain garden. So those locations have been nice too. And really, a lot of small gardens are actually better than one large one in the center of town anyway. So it does make a lot of sense to, you know, have them dotted all over town in residential spots. Be sure to use a how-to guide somewhere. You can get lots of tips and information that way, and a good native plant list for your area. And then, you know, it's all about having fun and sharing your story and spreading the word too. So let's move on to our green roofs as well. And on a snowy day like today, it's so nice to see all these sunny pictures. So don't look outside, just focus in, and we'll, you know, go back to our summer days here. So what is a green roof? Well, they're also called vegetated roofs or living roofs. They're planted gardens on the top of buildings, and it can cover either all or part of the roof. And mainly there are two different kinds of green roofs. So you can have an intensive roof, which has deeper soil. It can be a lot more expensive to install. And it's able to grow really big things, like you can have trees growing on intensive roofs, so much bigger installation. But what we did was an extensive roof. So these are shallower. And the roof in the picture here is the town hall in Sackville. And the soil depth was about 7 or 8 inches deep. So not too deep, means it's lighter, less expensive, but it also means we can only grow grasses, flowers, plants, which is okay for what we were doing for sure. And it also results in lower maintenance over time. So it's all about constructing. So we'll start here. So how do we construct the green roof? Well, EOS did not do it. We had, and the town had, you know, hired a landscaper to be able to do this properly. So that's the picture in the top corner, is the landscaper with their boom crane lifting all the materials onto the roof. And you have to put things down in particular order. So it's all about the layers. So you start with a waterproof barrier that goes onto the top of the roof, and then a root barrier, a drainage layer, filter cloth, growing medium, so that's the soil, but it's a very particular kind of technical soil that's quite absorbent and is made specifically for green roofs. And you top it all off with the plants. So you can see the picture in the bottom is all the different layers that actually went onto the town hall roof, and then the landscaper and even, you know, some of our staff got to help spread the soil around and stuff. So that's the construction phase. And then again, so many benefits with green roofs. They, for sure, you know, the number one reason why we did it with the funding that we had was focused on absorbing rainwater, reducing flood risk. But they also help to filter pollution, and they can be an additional insulation layer for the roof. So when you consider all those layers that go down, one of them is even sort of felt-like, and then the soil itself adds some insulation. Green roofs can also extend the life of the roof, can possibly extend the warranty of roofs, depending on the building. They also increase biodiversity, they create natural habitat. Again, we bring these plants up onto the roof, and the bees and butterflies somehow find us very quickly. They're able to mitigate the heat island effect. So before, the sun is beating down on the black roof, and now we've got things planted up there instead. Sequestering carbon for sure, and help reduce our stress and connect us with nature. There's something really special about being up on the roof surrounded by plants and grasses. And it's a space to grow food and enhance our resiliency to climate impacts. So to go into a little bit more detail about the green roofs in Sackville, so these were done this past year in 2021. EOS obtained funding from Environment Canada and Climate Change, again, their Eco Action Grant, for green roofs, and specifically to look for natural ways to reduce runoff. Also a goal around promoting the benefits and educating the public, trying to spread the word about green roofs in New Brunswick and increase community resilience. So we had some really nice partnerships with the town of Sackville and Mount A. We knew that both locations had roofs that were suitable, and they were happy to partner with us. So in terms of a methodology in general, if you're thinking about green roof as well, is that you need to make sure that it's structurally sound. So you need an engineer to do that check to make sure that the building can handle the load, because when you get all that soil up there and then it also absorbs water, it's quite heavy. So you want to make sure that the building is suitable for it, constructed for it, and all that stuff. So that's an engineer. And then you want to look at ordering materials and plants, and depending on the roof, you may need to work with the roofing company. So the town hall is a Suprema roof and Mount A is a Tremco roof. So we talked with both of those roofing companies and ordered their particular materials for their roofs. And then they need to be installed by qualified contractors. But when it comes to planting, community members can certainly get involved with that. So here's a picture of the town hall roof. We were able to extend the existing green roof area by almost 2,000 square feet. There's an 800 or so square foot area that was planted more than a decade ago when that building was built. So it was intended to be a green roof and to have it all be green roof, but there wasn't funding for it along the way. So that's where there was a great opportunity for us. We had a local landscaping company that was able to install the green roof layers, as you saw in the pictures earlier, and then EOS staff and lots of volunteers who we thank very much. I know some of you are on the call here, so thank you all very much for helping us plant. And we planted a variety of native flowers, berries, grasses, and I'll get into that list next. We also installed some solar lighting, so that's the picture here. So that the roof can be enjoyed day or night when it's open to the public. It really is considered a rooftop park in Sackville now. Unfortunately, though, COVID meant that we weren't able to do group tours, but we hope to be able to do that in the coming months. And this roof is it's on the town hall building, and so it's maintained by town staff now. And there's certainly plans to hopefully grow more food and support the food bank things in the future. So what did we plant? Well, we had to think about many different things. Things couldn't be too tall because, again, we only had like 7 or 8 inches of soil depth to hold things in place. We also needed to consider some shady areas on the roof, which is a bit more unique, I guess. When you think of a roof, you think of really dry, hot sun, but you can see in the back there, there's a wall. That's the wall of the fire station. So that creates a bit of shade. And then we needed plants that were flexible, again, that could tolerate dry, but could tolerate being inundated when it rains a lot. So it's definitely an experiment. We had some different advice from different people too, which is a bit challenging to deal with. So it is an experiment. I guess anytime you plant something, it is. So I'm really excited to see how these things do after this winter. But we planted native strawberries. We planted some wild blueberries that came from my own property. Really curious to see how those do and whether, the soil, it may not be acidic enough for them. So we may need to amend it a bit, but we'll see how those do. Switchgrass and sweetgrass and sedges are great as well. Echinacea, black-eyed Susans, asters, yarrow, lily, a native plant called Pearly Everlasting, which likes dry, warm spots too. And then for more of the edible benefits, we planted some mint, oregano, chives, sage, thyme as well. So now I'd like to take you on a virtual tour of the green roof, especially if you haven't had a chance to get up there yet, but when town hall's open, you're certainly allowed up there. So we start off in the existing part of the roof where we did some weeding and planted some new things. So you can see all the, the existing tall grass is doing really well, even a decade later. The town hall roof is really a sweet spot because it's got that nice deck in the middle surrounded by the gardens. And then we transition over to the new area. You can see the soil or the growing medium is a little bit different color, just a newer product from Suprema, I guess. There's our strawberry patch, and this was filmed at sort of, I think, the end of September. Certainly things got delayed, and anyway, that's just how it goes, especially with COVID. So you can see some of the plants have, they've kind of passed, but you can see the black-eyed Susans and the echinacea and stuff like that. So that is the roof. And then the Mount A roof. It's on the roof of the McCain Student Building. It overlooks the football field. And this portion of the roof up there measures just over 1,700 square feet. And Mount A did a few extra things. They were able to obtain some of their own funding or use some of their own money to also install a leak detection system. So they didn't have any green roof up there. Unlike the town hall roof, they were kind of starting more from scratch. So they installed a leak detection system, and then they put down the layers in the fall. I think it was November, so it's kind of just before the snow, or I think as the snow was starting to fall, actually. It was installed by certified Tremco roofers, so that's what needed to be done for the warranty for the Tremco roof. But it will be planted by Mount A professors, staff, and volunteers this spring. And there's lots of plans for the Mount A roof. So they're looking at opportunities for experiential hands-on learning, different studies and experiments, sort of a green lab space. They're also hoping to get school classes and kids up there for visits, public workshops, also a space to grow food and experiment as well for students, for the community, possibly the food bank. And then I think it'll also make a great entertainment space. So it's also near Tweedy Hall for those of you who are familiar with campus. So a space that sees conferences and weddings. Also, it overlooks the football field. So again, a great kind of space to be in. Just so many opportunities for students' well-being and mental health to be able to spend time out there on the green roof. And so many lessons learned as well. As you know, green roofs is definitely something a bit newer in New Brunswick. There aren't very many that we've come across anyway. Again, important to find people that want to partner with you. It makes things so much easier. But we also learned that not all roofs are suitable, and you really preferably want to look for an inverted roof. So you can see even at the back of this picture where sort of behind the deck, you can see there's a wall back there. Anyway, so inverted where there's space to hold the green roof installation. Important to do those engineering checks. You don't want to make sure you're not going to damage the building. And then there's a lack of green roof manufacturers in the Maritimes. So for the town hall roof, even though there was Suprema and there's a Suprema facility in Dieppe, they don't actually carry any of the green roof materials here locally, and everything had to be shipped in from Drummondville in Quebec. So that took time to get stuff delivered, and the pandemic didn't help with that either. Then we also experienced some challenges in choosing plants, as I mentioned earlier. Really interesting. I reached out to various experts and resource people, talked to the green roofers with Tremco and Suprema, talked to a professor at St. Mary's where they've had an experimental green roof for many years. Also talked to botanists and as many people as I could because I'm not an expert. And it was really interesting because I did get different advice. And I think maybe it might be native species in Quebec, of course, not all the same as native species out here, and different people have different experiences and stuff. But anyway, so I did the best I could, taking lots of different advice and coming up with a list of plants that will hopefully work well. And I'm excited and curious to see after this winter. But anyway, where you're sort of starting as one of the first roofs in the area, kind of starting to develop that plant list. Then there are different green roofer installer options. So depending on the roof and the property owner and stuff, it might be something that a landscaper can do, and otherwise it might need to be a roofer that installs. On average, we hit our estimated cost of between $20 and $25 per square foot to install an extensive roof. So that's all the layers and plants and everything. That was about our cost. Important to think about who will maintain the roof too, because as a nonprofit, so we get our funding and then we're just project based and we're not able to continue and we're on to something else. So really nice to have good partners where they will continue to look after the roofs for us. COVID delays and impacts, as I mentioned, related to delivery issues and sourcing plants as well, because it's just been such a popular gardening time. And then in the end, because of COVID and many other reasons, we're looking for more outdoor spaces, and green roofs offer really lovely outdoor spaces for communities. So lastly, we'll move on to food forests. So what is a food forest? Well, it's an edible garden plot It will contain trees and shrubs, plants, herbs, roots, or root vegetables, various ground covers, vines, and even mushrooms. All these things work together to kind of mimic an ecosystem. They use permaculture design techniques. So we're planting a lot of perennials, things that are going to come back year after year. And so because of that, they also don't need very much maintenance or watering over time. And it's also really important to choose plants properly and to think about the various functions of different plants that would exist in an actual forest. So you're going to want to include things like pollinators. So that can be bee balm, echinacea, milkweed, nitrogen fixing plants. So sometimes people use lupins, and natural mulching effects. So that can be done by lilies. This again is really sort of a crash course because there's just so much detail and considerations going into a food forest. So really just an overview. Some of the things that you can plant and some of the things that we planted, but again, many, many things and a much longer list that you can find out there. But some of the things that you could include are things like pear trees, nut trees. So that's the tall canopy layer. And then below that, you could have apple trees, you can have serviceberry and bayberry, cherry trees. And then even lower down, you'll see hascap berries, blueberries, native strawberries as a nice ground cover because they'll spread out and fill in. Rhubarb, currant bushes, daylilies, as we mentioned, for that mulching effect, and lupins, and then various supportive plants and flowers like yarrow and echinacea, blue vervain, and milkweed. We also planted a lot of herbs, so oregano, sage, thyme, and a native riverbank grape. So that's for that vine component. Mushrooms can also be planted, and we haven't done that, but we certainly left instructions with the schools that we worked with and hoping that they might do some mushroom logs. That's another component of a forest. And we planted something called walking onions, which is new to me, but helps with the root layer. So many benefits of the food forest, some of them similar to the rain gardens and the green roofs for sure. But these also really are focused on food. So being able to provide fresh, nutritious, abundant food in a sustainable way. But they also help with reducing runoff and flood risk. And they help protect and restore the soil. So we're really talking about building up the soil. You don't have to till it every year like a traditional vegetable garden. That's where the permaculture techniques come in. Carbon sequestration, again, as we're planting trees, increasing biodiversity and providing habitat as well. And there's less maintenance and work over time. Certainly a lot to get it going, and we and students moved a lot of soil this past summer. Brianna was there as well, helping out so much. So I've done all this by hand, but over time, as things grow in and grow up and just work together, there's less maintenance that way. Also, we're able to conserve water by growing things this way too. And we're building self-sufficiency skills, we're building resiliency as a community and getting connected with nature and our food sources for sure. So a closer look at the specific projects we did this past year. We planted food forests at Tantramar High School, Dorchester, and Port Elgin Regional Schools as well. We had grants from a variety of places to make all this happen, from Horizon Health Network, from the Mount Allison students and their Green Investment Fund, from the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, from the Sackville Rotary Club and Echo Foundation, and others as well. The goals of this project were really to create sustainable, biodiverse sources of food, to improve the environment, and to encourage community involvement and education too. So if you're thinking about doing a food forest in your community, or even a smaller version, in your backyard is definitely a possibility as well, then here are some suggested methods kind of based off how we did things too. So really important to spend lots of time researching and designing. And even though it's really snowy out there and it's February, this is a great time actually to start thinking about designing, your next garden or your forest at your house or your school or a community project. But really lots of benefits from researching and designing. So you want to think about the site that you have in mind and learn about its characteristics so that you're creating something as natural and in tune with nature as possible. So where is the sun, where north and south, do you have shade, what else is growing there, what kind of soil do you have, what sorts of plants and trees are really suited to that specific location. That will give you the most success. And then again, we at EOS are not at all experts in food forests, but just knew about their benefits and wanted to try it out and help our communities. And so we relied on advice from permaculture professionals and experts. We have great resources here locally in Tantramar. And in particular, we worked with Understory Farm and Design in Port Elgin. And she was able, well, she gave us some workshops as well, and some of you may have listened to her webinar back in the spring. So we learned a lot from her, and she kind of helped us with our designs and oversaw things and got us started. The design on the screen here is actually from students at Dorchester School. And so she had also taught them and us at the same time about all the different things to consider and the kinds of plants and things that we would be using. And so they got to work on their design. Then it's about site preparation. So we use something called cardboard mulch, which is recommended in a permaculture process. So that's where you set down cardboard over the grass. And so you don't actually have to, rip up that top layer of anything. You're really, focus on building up the soil. So cardboard goes down first, and then soil, compost, mulch and stuff, and then you plant into that. So selecting and purchasing plants, again, important to choose, native things where you can, things that are suited to our climate at least. And we have some great nurseries and places around too. We got a lot of our things from Cornhill Nursery and also locally at Anderson's Greenhouse and other places. So if you're doing a community project or a school project, lots of volunteers in all of our communities. It was really nice to see volunteers come out and help our schools as well. And then you want to think about maintenance, weeding, watering, really key during the first summer, the first, little while these things are getting established and growing and filling in. And then harvesting too. So we'll talk a little bit about what the schools plan to do with their harvests. But first, I'm going to take you on another virtual tour. This is the food forest at Port Elgin Regional School. Sort of a secret garden on one part of the property, and the principal did a really nice job of clearing out a space, leaving those 2 pine trees as a sort of special magical entrance. And then you're in this wonderful space. Again, the students designed it. You can see these sort of branching paths, and they designed it to kind of look like a tree. And so the tree branches are the paths. Lots of space for them to continue to plant more things, but the front has 2 big pear trees, and then there's trees at the back. There's lots of rhubarb along one side, tons of currant bushes in another area. And also community members were coming by and dropping things off. And I think a lot of the currants came from the principal. And so it doesn't have to be tons of money either. If the community comes together and you've got a giant rhubarb patch in the back, and you can cut that up and donate some. So it's a work in progress for sure in a huge area. And the students were a big part of it also. Very special garden. And then just to go over some of the ways that the schools are using their forests or plan to in the future. All of them have plans to use the space as outdoor learning areas and healthy food for students. Some of the schools are using it for their breakfast programs or ingredients in meals at the cafeterias. Some of the schools plan to make preserves or pies and things. They'll have blueberries and strawberries, Haskell berries to use. The high school plans to use ingredients in their culinary classes, and they hope to help the local food banks as well. And then this is a recent picture from Port Elgin School, where they were enjoying some of the things from their food forest back at the beginning of the school year too. So again, lessons learned from the food forest. Well, it was really an excellent, positive, feel-good project. There's growing interest in gardening due to the pandemic and climate change. So it was a really timely project. When we had put the funding together for this, it was before we knew the pandemic was coming our way. But also because of the pandemic, we ended up having some challenges around finding certain plants, trees, things that we wanted. Like Cornhill had run out of certain things quite early on, just because there were so many people planting so many things, which was great. And anyway, we were able to still find enough of what we needed. So choose plants again that are grown and suited to our maritime climate. They just have a better chance of succeeding. Have a long-term maintenance plan and a harvesting plan. And Brianna actually did up documents to help the schools along the way with, what to do at what part of the season in terms of maintenance. And then I think what was maybe most eye-opening and unexpected for me anyway, was all the benefits for the students. And so it was really interesting to to watch the students come together and to see leaders emerge. And we planted these gardens. I mean, it was like kindergarten to grade 12, depending on the school. It was all ages got involved. And so really neat to see the kids interacting with each other, to see teamwork taking place without the direction from adults. Like we really were kind of standing back. And I think back to the days that we were at Port Elgin School, and that was May, I think, when we were doing site prep and trying to haul the soil down a slope and into the garden, and it was just really wet. It was springtime and stuff, and so these kids are trying to move their wheelbarrows through muck and everything, and just anyway, just the way they were helping each other, and they were so focused on the task, and it was just so great to see. And then some of the teachers also mentioned at the schools, I think all the schools, teachers mentioned how this process of building, of getting out into the dirt and planting stuff really leveled the playing field for many students. So they said, even though, there's students who didn't have top marks or weren't great in the classroom, you didn't know that out here. And it really, the process of planting and stuff allowed everybody to contribute to the creation of the garden. And there were so many smiling faces and everybody really happy that, everyone was able to help equally. And just, anyway, so many little life lessons and learning opportunities along the way, from kids experiencing plants and herbs and things they hadn't seen before, to just helping each other, trying to figure out how to do things, was all really great additional benefits and things that we learned. So in general, takeaways, we learned how to solve challenges like stormwater runoff, erosion, and flooding. We also know that it can help reduce flooding, but not so much when the ground is frozen. So, definitely need to consider natural infrastructure in with everything else, but they're cost effective and the value increases. There are so many benefits that we've gone over for adaptation, mitigation, food security, mental health, and contributing to our resilience. Really important to try to use native species. Excellent community projects to do together, great ways for creating community outdoor spaces, lots of funding options. And as I've said a couple times, you don't have to be an expert, you just need to kind of be a leader and be interested in getting it done. So finally, to wrap up, if you're interested in getting involved, there are some new projects that we're working on. We've got some more funding to do more of these food forests, and we're looking for locations in the Memramcook Tantramar area. So if you've got a location in mind that's a public space, whether it's a school or a community area, that would be lovely to hear from you. And then we'll also be looking for volunteers. So thank you very much. And I'm open for any questions, suggestions while we still have a bit of time.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda. It was so nice to relive all the projects that we worked on this summer. And I agree about the students. It was really, really nice to see them come together and all the teamwork that happened. It was a heartwarming project. So our first question is from Eric Toos King, and he's asking, all of the examples are great stories for homeowners and small buildings. Most of these examples are fairly small scale and therefore from a global perspective have a small impact on large challenge of reducing greenhouse gases. How can these examples be developed on a larger scale? Can rain gardens be used near parking lots, usually paved, of apartment buildings or commercial and industrial sites in larger municipal areas? So is that an example of how it could be used on a bigger scale?
Yeah, for sure. It really is about doing more of this everywhere. And so I was really happy to see lots of people interested in participating in this call this morning, because EOS can only do so many, but really we need to see this in all communities all over the place for sure. And lots of applications in all sorts of locations.
Absolutely. And another question from Karen. That's interesting that the town of Sackville had a green roof that started 10 years ago. What did we learn from that part of the green roof? So were some plants still growing, or which ones survived the best?
Yeah, well, I still don't know exactly what that original planting design was. Like, I don't know what isn't there that was originally. You could see in that video of all those tall, big bushy grasses, those are original, but there must have been other things that didn't do so well along the way. And again, we've kind of forgotten, or I haven't been able to find staff that I don't know, were around then or can kind of remember, but along the lines of the town also had I guess landscapers or different contractors, different things at different times. And last summer when we went up there, a lot of the filled in area was filled in with petunias. So just annuals to give it a pop of color and fill in that space. So that's a lot more maintenance. So right, you're planting those every year, whereas we've gone in and planted perennials that are hopefully well suited to that environment. So that'll create less work hopefully for town staff and less water as well. So unfortunately, I can't answer your question very well because I don't know what didn't survive. I don't know what's missing up there, but I know those grasses do look great.
Yeah. A question from Stephen. Do you have a specific list of roofing materials that a person needs for a green roof?
Yeah, so that construction page that I shared that had those different layers, that's really the basis of at least the extensive green roof that we did. And those will come from the roofing company. So Suprema, Tremco, similar systems, but anyway, they've each got their own. So, having that waterproof layer, the root membrane, the filter cloth and drainage layers, the growing medium, all that sort of stuff. I think that's all pretty standard. And you can get those from those roofing companies.
Perfect. A question from Sarah. I've looked at planting yarrow, but was warned that it can get invasive. Have you heard that problem in this region?
I guess not. I mean, I know we're also looking for things that will spread out, and fill in. So it depends on what you're doing with it, I guess. But we do want things to spread out and fill in, and so I'm hoping it will do all right. One thing that I have had maybe a bit of, I don't know if it's a problem, but definitely can take off is sweetgrass. And some of the very first rain gardens, we planted decent amounts of sweetgrass, not realizing that it will take off. And so some of those gardens, it seems like it's mostly grass at this point. I mean, it's that, grass is still really water loving and helpful and stuff, but it just didn't turn out the way I thought it would originally. But yarrow has been okay for me.
Yeah, we certainly planted a lot of yarrow, so I hope it doesn't spread too much.
Yeah.
A question from Jean-Claude. How do you handle friendly but hungry animals such as deer, raccoons, hares, and even bears?
Yeah, well, it makes me think of the Canada geese that we had issues with at the high school. But I guess they were most interested in the mulch that we put down. So we were looking for inexpensive options. I mean, we only had so much of a budget. So there was some straw, I guess, I brought in from a farmer that was spread out for mulch, and it was in the spring. So the geese came and grabbed a lot of that, I guess, for their nests, and that we hadn't really counted on. And otherwise, these food forests are really new, so we'll have to see how they do with other animals and critters. I know that sometimes, the permaculture folks will say, well, you do want those critters to come into the garden and do their thing and leave some droppings, because then that adds to the whole ecosystem and adds some natural fertilizer, and that's how a forest would work. But where we also want to collect some food, we don't want them to take. So, I mean, we did put some tree guards around the apple trees and pear trees and stuff like that to deter some things, but none of these are fenced off. And so we'll have to see how things go for sure.
Absolutely. So I have a question from Chris asking about a PDF for roof gardens and food forests. So I'm just going to quickly link in the chat our EOS Eco-Energy website that has a project list. So it would include links to our green roof project and our food forest project. So if you click on that link, you should be able to find a whole project section, and there are some PDFs and brochures and things like that that you could download with plant lists and more into our process. So hopefully that should help a little bit. We have a comment from Cassandra saying that she would like to incorporate a food forest at the Amherst Community Garden, which is really nice to hear. And yeah, definitely check out the website for more information. We have a question from Margot asking, what does a leak detection system consist of when doing a green roof?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm overly familiar to talk about that enough. I know it was something that Mount A wanted or needed to install. When I went up and had a look, it looked like a wire kind of around the perimeter of their green roof area and around the drain. So both of the roofs have drains as well. So when there's so much rain, there's excess, it's not getting absorbed by what we planted, then it'll go down the drain as well. So Mount A installed this detection system. Yeah, it looked like a wire that went around, and it'll let them know, I guess, if their roof is malfunctioning.
Yeah. All right, so I think those are the ends of the questions in the chat. So I'm just going to stop recording the webinar